Well, it is Monday morning, and that means it's time for more relaxing, maybe painting, but probably as I'm doing here now, sanding and filing with Dice and Dungeons. And today I am only going to be doing, it says on the little thing there, half day. It might be a little longer. I'm probably planning to go till about 12:30 because of life, So there's some appointments that need to be kept, and that means that I need to keep them instead of doing this, no matter how exciting this might be. Sometimes, you just need to adapt to other people's schedules. So what I'm doing here is finishing one of 4 brackets for finishing. I guess I am finishing. I'm giving it a finish. One of 4 brackets for the reaction control jets on the lunar module of the Apollo. And these brackets are taking a while because they are very poorly formed. These kind of angle brackets that go on the side of the lunar excursion module. They go here like that. Okay. Are not as bad as the ones that go on the back of it. The ones on the front here are not too bad. When you insert them, it leaves a big gap. As you can see, there's a big gap there. That will need to be probably filled in, I'm guessing, to do some filling. Once that's done, because it's just way too big a gap. And these brackets came in 2 parts. They were halves. Okay. And the halves they don't match up well. Just put it that way. They don't match up well. And as a result, is this the front? Yeah. See, that kind of rocks on there because the 2 halves don't match, and because they don't match, they need to be sometimes filed because there's a lot of plastic to be removed, and then definitely sanded to smooth it out. That part is so far below the rest of them that it is not ever going to be made up. So I'm just going to put it in as it is, and that'll just be part of the gap filling process. So this one I was working on Friday, and I just started actually working on it a little bit before the stream started. Seems to be okay. This one needs a lot of work. It's a big seam here, big lumps and stuff there. So this one goes on the other side like that. And you can see the seams and the irregularities. So what I'm going to do is, since I started on these, I'm going to finish these side brackets at least. Big divot there. I kind of filled it in on the other one, and it filled in pretty well, I think. I'll put a little filler on there after I get the rest of it done. So I'm going to do this one, and then I've got the antennae, these little antennae. I think since this is called relaxing painting, I'm going to paint the antennae. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to start that now because they're going to be 3 colors. well, two of them will be 3 colors, one will be 2. This is similar to the high gain antenna on the service module. Here it's primed. I can still see that there is mold marks on this. It's injected molded, and the molds, let's just say the molds don't always like come together tightly. So a little bit of plastic will ooze out sometimes between the two halves of the molds, and that leaves these lines on the pieces like these struts. And because this is right at the top and it's going to be painted metallic, that would have shown. Okay, so the way this is going to go, and like I said, I'm going to do some painting early on. Why not? I'm going to start because there's going to be 3 colors. The sort of convention I started with the high gain antenna on the service module is to use dark aluminium. It's called aluminium because the paints I use are from Europe, so they say aluminium instead of aluminum. I'll use those interchangeably, kind of haphazardly, without any rhyme or reason. So the support structure, the struts, are painted to dark, and then I painted the antenna parts just aluminum or aluminium, which is a much lighter color, and then the sort of the protrusions, the antenna part, like this post here and these bits here, I painted duraluminum, so they're slightly darker than what's behind it. I don't remember if I painted the back of the dish the dark color or not. So I might take an excursion over to the parts here. I'll even use this as an opportunity to show you what I've done. The service module, having been completed, is in this box so it doesn't get all dusty or broken. Well, that was fun. Yeah, this is the service module. It's the top of it. Okay. And the command module sits up here on the top here. Try to show it on both cameras. I can't. Well, yeah, there, and there's some little detail and stuff on there. And then this is the bottom, and this is the outlet for the service module's rocket, which is really important. And this is the cone for it, and this fits on by friction so that you can take it off to see the detail. And that's the high gain antenna I was talking about. And it looks like what I did, it folds up. It has to fold up while it's in the fairing when it takes off, and then once it's in orbit, it comes out like that. And it looks like I painted the backs of the dishes the aluminum because the support brackets had a dark aluminium, and you can see the difference in the color. And then here on the front, the dishes are aluminum, and the little probe things, the antenna things, are duraluminum, which is slightly darker, and you can actually see the difference if you get kind of in the right light. So that's what I wanted to check. I'm not keeping this on because then it doesn't sit in the box very well. But since I have this out, I can show you the interior detail. This opens up here like that, and then you can see some of the interior detail of the service module. Very, very carefully painted that and put it together, and it came out looking okay. It's not perfect. There's flaws in it, but it's a solid B. It came out pretty well. And then more often than not, I'm able to close it up. This part of the shell, the exterior, was cemented on, but it isn't holding that well, and I'm not going to mess with it at this point. So anyway, I killed two birds with one stone there, so to speak. I'm not in favor of killing birds, so maybe I shouldn't use that aphorism. But I wanted to see how I did the antenna so that I could do these kind of in a similar way. So I don't know. This tape might still be sticky enough to hold it. Yeah, that's just for storage so that it doesn't get all banged around and lost and whatever. Yeah, so I think I'll start painting these now because one color needs to dry before I can do the next one. And then this is the hatch, the airlock hatch that goes between the LEM and the command module, and for some reason that I don't understand, it's supposed to not be cemented in. In fact, it says, this was so funny, I left it on here, it says, do not cement in place, so I won't. So I want to paint these parts, the support part, for example. And there's two ways I can hold this. I can put an alligator clip on it and stick it in something, or I can stick these in sticky tack like this. And I think I can do that. I think I'll do that. That sometimes it gets on, some of it comes off onto it. But I think I can make this work. I'll just stick them on there and let it hold them while I paint the struts. And I can kind of hold it too if the brush is pushing it too much. And then the hatch, I could paint the hatch the same color as the whole rest of the LEM is going to be painted, but I'm not going to because I want it to look, I want it to stand out a little bit. So I'm going to paint it the dark aluminium color, which is the first color I'm going to be using. And what's up with this? There's a little bit of, I'm just going to use some fine sandpaper. Clean that off. I just ran my finger across it and there was a little bit of plastic sticking out there. So this is just, I can just set this down and paint it that way. Or I can stick it on the sticky tack like this. But I think I'm just going to get a little piece of cardboard and not this cardboard because I'll get paint all over it, and just set it down on there. Maybe mutter to side. It's so hard to make these inconsequential decisions. See, if I put it on here, I won't get the edge right. Although when I turn it over, I can get the edge then. I paint that side. I'm painting the bottom first. So I'm just going to remove this and put it over more toward the edge. Put this over here like this. There we go. Now I just need to remember not to get these too close together. They have magnets in the bottom and they repel each other, sometimes leading to a disaster. When I had put some models on here, some minifigs, and I set one down next to the other really close, it just jumped, it flew. And it broke it. It broke a couple of pieces off a little minifig. All right, so I'm going to get the first color on and then let that dry while I try to clean this up. And then these brackets are beyond belief awful. Those are going to take forever to get fixed. And they'll be smaller than this. This is so weird. I'll just point this out again because I showed this to people last week when I cemented them together. These brackets here, there's a reaction control jet on either side and then one on either side here. But the two halves are molded in different sizes. So if you can see it against my finger, you can see that the one near my finger is bigger than the one near my thumb. And it's true in all, I tried to figure it out. It was like, but it's true in all dimensions. It's just bigger. And so I need to file that down and sand it so it's the same size as the other. Go figure. So I'll get some painting going here. Here's some other places where I need to do sanding and filing. These are, you can see the seam here where the two pieces came together. That needs to be sanded down. And then I'll find out after I sand it whether there's still a gap there that needs to be filled in or not. I know there's a gap down here where the tab went into the slot. So a little bit of filler needs to go in there and that can be sanded down. Oh, and then there's since I've got this in my hand, one of these pieces had a divot in it that needed to be filled in, and I filled it in, and that needed to be sanded. And since I'm thinking of it, if I can find it, there it is. It's just this little dimple there. So this will be let's see how that worked, if it filled in well or not. It's still a little bit. I can see it. Less than it was. Yeah, it's almost invisible. So that worked. I'd say it worked well enough. Okay, enough of that, right? People want to see painting on relaxing whatever with Dyson Dungeons. So out here, into which I will drop a drop of paint. Put that aside. And I'm going to use a fairly small brush for this because there's little nooks and crannies I need to get into. So I'll do that. And then that one the same way. Sticky tack. We should actually use a slightly bigger brush for the bottom of the hatch. Why not? I have to clean brushes when I'm done messing. I should waste a little more time doing something. A little bit of coffee. All right, this is pretty good though. You're going to see painting. Too bad that people who are joining a little bit later aren't going to see this. Hi, new follows. Thanks for joining in. I am working on, well, since you're a new follow, I'm going to show you what I'm working on. I'm working on this Apollo model. It's a really cool model because it includes all of the components of the Apollo stack that sits on top of the Saturn V rocket. So when people talk about Apollo, usually they only think about the command module or maybe the lunar module, but the Apollo component of the trip to the moon was this entire thing, which included the escape tower, the command module, the service module, the lunar excursion module, ascent and descent stages, and this fairing that held the LEM and supported the rest of the structure. And so far, I've completed the escape tower and the service module, and I'm now working on the lunar excursion module. I've got the pieces of the fairing painted, and they're ready to be assembled. And someday when I feel like it, I'll assemble these, and then this will be done as well, leaving only the command module. The lunar module it's proving very challenging because there have been some issues with the production quality of the parts anyway, where they were injection molded, and sometimes the mold didn't fill all the way and there was an indentation, but more often than not, there's like flashing around it where the mold didn't quite close, and where in these cases, these parts here, they're very tiny parts, but the two halves are different sizes. And that's actually happened once before with a part of the service module. This thing here, this cylinder, okay, the two halves were molded in different thicknesses. So one had a thinner wall than the other, and that meant that when they were put together, the one with the thicker wall left it extended and left a really visible seam down the side. So there's that. Now, the reason I'm working on this Apollo is that although Dice and Dungeons is a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, and our Dungeons and Dragons show, it is a show, streams on Twitch with a live chat on Sundays at 2. It's usually like 3 Sundays a month. We don't stream it on holidays like we didn't yesterday because of Father's Day, and we figure, well, people are busy, they'll be doing other things, so we didn't. But you can catch up with all of them later because they are put onto YouTube and also as a podcast. I'm using this dark aluminum. These metallic paints I'm using are actually designed for airbrushing, airbrush colors, so they're quite thin. But I found that when using it with a brush on small surfaces like these struts, okay, they cover really quite well. Brushing them onto large surfaces, like the cone of the service module rocket engine, okay, I discovered that brushing there did not work that well. I ended up having to give it three coats, and there was still a little streakiness that happened because of brush marks. I should have airbrushed that, but I didn't, because on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really quite proficient, 1 being don't touch it, it'll be a disaster, I am a 2 when it comes to airbrushing. And I don't know why. I mean, I've tried it several times. And I even bought 2 different kinds of airbrushes, hoping that that I'm going to paint the part that cements in because it might show a little bit. Yeah. The main problem is, well, you see, I'm getting this darker paint on place where I'm going to be painting it lighter later, but then I'll be painting up to it much more carefully. But this way, I know it's covered. The biggest problem I have with airbrushing is I just get paint everywhere. Paint does that to me. I don't know how or why. And maybe you might even see it here today as I'm doing some painting, is that it like jumps. It doesn't really do that, but it gives that impression of just like jumping inches through the air so that I end up getting paint like on my fingers, like the back of my thumb or something, a place that didn't come anywhere close to the paint will have paint on it. And I'll go, how did that get there? And I will answer myself, I have no clue, but there it is. You get paint on yourself. Well, if that happens just like with a little brush like this, you can imagine that the process of, filling the cup for the airbrush, pouring the paint from one container to another, airbrushing itself where there's paint flying around, and then trying to clean up. Let's just say that for me, I did a lot of cleaning up because I was getting paint everywhere, mostly on places where I didn't want it. And so in frustration, or actually not, it was not even frustration. It was just like, I really don't want to just keep cleaning up all the time. I have given up on airbrushing. But when I start looking at other models I might be building after I'm done with the Apollo, I might have to try to teach myself again. If we can move the camera, it might be kind of fun watching me struggle, Since this isn't a how-to show, it might be kind of interesting and fun to just watch me struggle with airbrushing. You see it mess. You can see the mess in the process of creation. Sober, because the bottom of this will show, and a good thing I did that, because there's spots that I thought I had painted that I didn't. To keep that in mind, that when I try to teach myself again, reteach myself how to use an airbrush, that we can move these cameras around. The viewers can watch a horrible mess in the process of creation, because I can almost guarantee that that's what it will be. And then if I finally get the paint into the airbrush, then I'll try different nozzle settings. You can do that so that you can spray either a wide area or a tiny little line, which would be a good thing to do. I started an airplane model like right now it must be like 10 years ago, seriously, an ME-262, and that there's just no way it can be parts of it, like the cockpit area and the landing gear struts and things like that. Parts of it can be hand painted and have been, but the body itself really needs to be airbrushed, because it's the bottom of the plane, is painted a different color than the top of the plane, so that you have camouflage on the land and difficult to see from below, that kind of thing. So I started that ages ago, and then I was all prepared to airbrush it so that it was beautifully done and camouflaged and looked like the box top and all that sort of thing, and started working with the airbrush, and nope, disaster. So the model now has just been sitting under a piece of rag, basically, to keep it dust free. And it's just been sitting there all this time because I can't I can't paint with an airbrush. So if I relearned how, if I tried it and actually succeeded at not being hideous with it, but just being, even if I'm working at a C level with an airbrush, like this model, I'm striving to hit a B, even a B plus. Occasionally, by accident, on certain parts, I've hit an A level quality. Okay. But even if I could get it a C level quality with an airbrush, I think it would be worthwhile, because then I'd have you could work on different models in different ways. Some of the other ones that I've got here, like I've got it's really cool. It's a B-29 cutaway, so that just like the submarine I built before this, you can see the interior in approximate detail. It's not extremely detailed. It gives the impression of the detail of the interior. Like the interior parts would all be hand painted because they're detailed, but the exterior, the wings and whatever, would need to be painted aluminum using these airbrush paints like I've got here with an airbrush, right? And that would be a good thing if I could actually use an airbrush. But back to what I was talking about before. I am working on models, even though Dice and Dungeons is a Dungeons and Dragons show. This stream started with me painting dungeon tiles, which we produce on the 3D printers that are sitting behind me and that we use in the show. And we were producing those for the show, and our DM said, well, why don't you stream the painting of the dungeon tiles? And I said, why? And she said, because I want you to. And so I said, well, whatever, I'm sitting here painting. It doesn't much matter if you put a camera on me or not. I'm still just going to be painting dungeon tiles. And she said, well, you'll have to talk about stuff while you're painting. And I said, why? And she said, well, to fill it in, and then we'll have a chat screen, and you can maybe talk to people who join in, if anybody does. And anyway, I agreed to do that. So for a very, very long time, all this was streaming the painting of dungeon tiles. And then occasionally minifigs, like the minifig for our characters or some of the bosses. And that was great until we got all the stuff we needed. Okay. So then I'm using some isopropyl alcohol because water doesn't clean the metallics as well as it does some of the others, even though they're water-based paints. So it was like, okay, well, we don't have any more dungeon tiles or minifigs. What will we do to fill the time? So I started working on models on Wednesdays, and the one I worked on, actually second, but I won't talk about the first one because nobody paid attention to that. They didn't like it. But it was a submarine that was actually produced in the mid-'60s. It's a Renoir cutaway model of the first Polaris launching, ballistic missile launching submarine. The George Washington was the ship. And it was one that I actually had when I was in grade school. I mean, it's not the same kit because that disappeared ages ago, but it's the same kind of kit as the one I built. I can get quite literal. I wanted to be clear that I didn't find the kit that I built as a kid and rebuilt it. No, but it's the same the same thing basically. And well, it was the same kit. The kits I were building, and I called them kits because I ended up buying 3 of them because it's hard to get vintage model kits that have not been started or are missing pieces. You can, but then those are collector levels. You know, people collect old models, especially if they're still shrink wrapped, or if not the whole box shrink wrapped, at least the parts, the interior parts are still inside the original bags. So I could have gotten one of those, fairly expensive, but why mess up somebody's collection? I wanted to build the models, so I got myself 3 kits of this vintage Renwall submarine, and it's good that I did. Each one was started in one fashion or another. This was a complicated kit, so it was really common for people to get one and do steps 1 or 2, or worse yet, they do steps 5. For some reason, every kit, the very last step was something that they had started. And for the most part, the only painting that was done on some of these were a couple of the bulkheads, very like step 2 or 3 of the construction of the model. And I was able to remove the paint on the 2 bulkheads that were painted that I needed to use. The paints back then, and well, still are, but the only paints you could really get then were enamels. Couple companies made them, but they were enamels. They weren't any of these nice water-based acrylics. And so, why is that there? Like a little flaw there. See if I can get that out. No one's going to know it's there. The only way you see it is when you take the hatch out of the model. And I don't know why you would take the hatch out of the model, because if you took the hatch out of the real thing, then all of the air would escape from the LEM and everybody would be shot off into space. It would be a horrible disaster. So that's why I don't understand why this part isn't cemented into place. Okay, because why the hatch is not ever supposed to come off. The model itself does come apart. All of the different components, each section detaches from the others. So it's possible for you to, if you had one of these, to recreate the Apollo mission. And the instruction manual even shows you how to do that. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. It makes constructing the model a little harder, because if the parts don't fit together all that well, then, it's real easy to take them apart because they fall apart. Anyway, I ended up building that submarine and finished it a while ago, and then had a choice between working on this Apollo model or Porco Rosso's Savoia. His plane, Porco Rosso's plane, we found at 148th. Somebody found it for me and gave it to me as a gift. It was a really nice gift. Porco Rosso's Savoia. And decided to build the Apollo instead. And, it's coming along really slowly. It feels like it's very slow because there's so much work involved in getting the parts to fit together well. Okay, so I got a clean brush. Close this up so I don't spill it everywhere. And I wouldn't spill it everywhere, but I'd spill it in enough places to feel like it was everywhere. So when this paint dries, I'm going to be painting the dishes, the antenna dishes, kind of a brighter aluminium color. Aluminium. I'll be being very careful about the boundaries between the different colors. And then I'll be painting the inside of the airlock hatch, the same dark aluminium. And then there'll be a couple of, oh no, I lied. The next thing I'm going to paint is going to be the little antenna probe things, this little point there and these here. And I'm going to paint those dirt aluminium, which is an intermediate color. I'm going to paint those first because I need to paint up to them in order to get the lines right. Anyway, these will take a while to paint because there's different colors and different orders, and they need to dry in between. Hi, Who. Yes, I'll do a flip. I haven't done a flip yet. Let's do this one. This is whatever. So I'll flip this. Four, five, six, 5 this side and 1 that side. Yeah, you would think that the laws of probability were not functioning. Okay, so I'll test these again. What's up with that? I'm seeing the result of filing in one direction and not in the others. I had to file down here and here because the seam comes across this way, but in doing that, this got lower and this lower than the middle part. So there's just a little bit of getting rid of one unevenness gives rise to another. Okay, so there's that. This one, you can see the starting condition. You can see the seams on it. They're highly visible. This is there. This is, they're just there, and they're not good. So there's kind of a 3-step process here. One is to do some initial filing where there's a lot of plastic to take off. Okay, I'll use a file for that. And then when it gets close, because this cuts pretty quickly, but it also leaves marks, I'll use 600 grit sandpaper like this here. That will be the next step. And then polish it with this, which is like 1500 grit emery cloth. And these hold the reaction control jets on the sides and the top and the bottom. And there's little location pins on them. In this case, it was so poorly molded, and the location pin is actually right on the seam, okay, that it's gone. So I'll be, they're still sort of on the other one. So I have a way of locating where they're supposed to go. I should be able to, if I find a way to get them, decide what kind of adhesive to use, I should be able to get them in place. After I'm done with this, which is going to take longer than you would like, okay, it just always does. It's a slow, kind of tedious process getting these parts to be usable, because I don't want to file too much away. I don't want to leave all sorts of file marks on it, screwing up the surface texture kind of thing. This one's really bad in terms of the two parts not having anything in common with each other. Yeah, so this is taking some fairly aggressive filing, and then it's going to take some serious sanding. A little round one here. Use that in the yeah, and started focusing so much on how badly these pieces are not coming together that I lost my train of thought. That's my excuse anyway. Sometimes I just lose my train of thought because I just lose it. It's gone. Why they call it a train of thought? Why do you think that is? I mean, it doesn't. I wasn't talking about trains. Wasn't even thinking about trains. It was not a thought of trains. It had nothing to do with trains. Maybe it's not literally like a train, a physical train, like a locomotive drawn set of cars like that. Maybe what they're talking about is train in a more generic sense, which is like it's too bad that this part shows so much. It's coming along. If I take off enough plastic, eventually the unevenness between the two parts disappears. It's just I'm being cautious about how much I'm taking off. I guess they mean train like in one, like a bunch of stuff following some other stuff, training behind it, trailing behind it. Yeah. See if it's something that is visible because of just a difference in reflectivity or whether it's still there. I can't really feel it. Sometimes it's like that, the seam is still visible because maybe different reflectivity of the two different parts or something. But if you can't feel it with one's fingernail, it probably really isn't there. The other way to tell is the reflectivity. If it's reflective, if the reflectivity on one side of the seam is different than the other, that means that it's not even yet. Still case here. Still, this side is a little higher than that side because right at the seam, this is less reflective because it's been worn down with the file, and this is still reflective, which means the file hasn't hit it yet. Okay. Well, it's taking quite a lot of adjusting of the surface. That's for sure. I'm gonna have to do a fair amount of polishing on that then too, because the surface texture of the different parts is noticeably different. Do that in a bit. Let me get around to this side. Well, last week I was having a lot of, well, it was actually the week before last, wasn't it? God, losing track of time. Old curmudgeon complains about newfangled gizmos, but then I was talking about some of the gizmos that were real improvements, and one, no, I guess it was the commercial release of transistor radios. Okay, I mean portable radios until then meant that you had a tube radio, a radio that ran on vacuum tubes, which meant it was really quite heavy. Okay. And there weren't batteries. I guess sometimes there were batteries to run it, but they were big, heavy batteries. So when you were talking about a portable radio, you're talking about was a pretty large box that probably weighed, I don't know, 15 pounds or more. It was portable only in the sense that it probably had a handle on it. You know, portable TVs were like that at the time too. In the 1950s, they came out with portable TVs because they weren't in a big cabinet, and they had a handle on it. They weighed something like 20 pounds. You had to be pretty careful with it so you didn't jostle it and break a tube, which you could do if you bounced it around too much, either the tube itself or its mounting. The vacuum tubes inside, I mean. So there were, the radios were the same way, portable in the sense that it was physically possible to move it, although not easy. Definitely not an easy thing to do. So what permitted the creation of real portable radios was the invention of the transistor. And transistors replaced vacuum tubes, but they were much smaller and lighter, and could be run off of the electricity from much smaller, lighter batteries. So transistor radios came out, and they were surprisingly tiny and light. And when you're looking at things that were just like this long and like 6 inches long and 4 inches wide and maybe an inch and a half thick, and they got smaller as time went on. The speakers weren't very good, as you can imagine, back then. Speaker technology was, let's just say that you did not have a woofer producing bass, but the sound quality was adequate to, especially for young teens who were then listening to the music of the day. The sound quality was fine because you could take your music with you. So even if it wasn't perfect, it was way better than not having it. So that was a huge thing. So I remember them coming out while I was still in grade school. I went to like a K-8 school, which is kind of interesting. There was no middle school. I never had a middle school experience because when you got into grades 6, 7, and 8, I was with the same kids I was with in grades 1 through 5. We all grew up together. So we didn't have to be dealing with, going to a new school and establishing pecking orders and all of that. That was all settled years before that. So that was cool. Anyway, that was an advantage at the time growing up for me, I think, is that I didn't have to leave my grammar school to go to a middle school. We just all grew up together. But transistor radios came out, and then the thing about transistor radios was the competition. And what would you would say, well, what do you compete with a transistor radio? I mean, what's the competition that you could have? Is it like the color or the sound quality or the manufacturer? Who knows? I don't even know what the manufacturers were. I don't think we paid attention to that. I think maybe there was just like one company that was making these at the time. I can't recall. No, but the competition was, how many transistors does your radio have? It's kind of like watches. Back in the day, it was like they used jewels, little chips of rubies usually, because they were really hard, as the bearings inside the watch. And using jewels, like little chips of rubies, and they were making synthetic rubies then. It's like, how many jewels does your watch have? Like, does it matter? Yeah, because mine has 8 and yours has 11, so mine must be inferior. Anyway, it was the same thing with the radios. They played, whether you had 7 transistors or 10 transistors or 12 transistors. What did we know? It was like, more transistors has to be better, right? I'm not sure why some of them had more than others. It didn't seem to make any difference in terms of the quality of the sound or how long the battery lasted or anything like that. But some of them had more transistors than others, and that's how we competed with our radios, is how many transistors did it have? And now you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. What do you mean, the number of transistors? And what are you talking about, like 8 transistors? Because now we're used to having equipment that, anything that has like hundreds, thousands, millions of transistors, right? Well, the thing to remember is that a transistor was an individual thing. Okay? And I remember my uncle had a TV repair shop, TV and radio repair shop. And when transistors came out, he had some. These little things. They were, I don't know, like 3/8 of an inch in diameter. I guess you'd say they were actually pretty large. Some of them were square. Most of them were round. They're just like little round discs. Okay. And there were 3 wires that stuck out of them because there's the 3 components of the transistors. If you look up how transistors work, nowadays it's all solid state. You can't even tell what they were. But then a transistor was a thing. It was one transistor was a thing. And it was like each transistor replaced a vacuum tube. They serve the same function. They were kind of like switches. So yeah, for some reason, we thought that having more transistors in a radio is better than having fewer, and I can't understand why, because they played differently. I mean, they didn't play differently. They just played. Anyway, I just thought I'd talk about that because, I'm filling the time while I'm doing this really not exciting filing and sanding of this bracket that is going to hold reaction control jets on the side of the lunar excursion module. And it is, it's come along okay. This has the same problem that the other one has, in that there's just this discontinuity here. This fits, if I recall correctly, here, like this. Okay. And once it's cemented into place, you can see that there's just a whole lot of gap around it, and that gap will just need to be filled in with, I'm going to end up using spackling, and it will look like a weld line. The spackle will not match the, it'll look slightly porous compared to, or matte, I guess, as opposed to the shiny surface of the plastic. Kind of wobbles there, just like this one does, because the alternative, this one wobbles less. It's just badly done, just badly formed. Anyway, I thought I would talk about transistor radios because there's a couple interesting things about them. One is that we think of millions of transistors as millions of these tiny, infinitesimally small, teeny tiny little things that are molded by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, onto an integrated circuit. We don't think of them as they were when they were original, which is that a specific component, a 3/8 inch or even a 1/4 inch in diameter disc that was maybe 1/8 of an inch thick, that had 3 wires hanging out of it, and the wires had to be, soldered into the component where the transistor was going. Okay, well, I think I've got the seams down pretty well. Is this one the same? Well, the same issue. No. The two halves of this are not the same size. Let's put it that way. Not as bad as the other bracket, where they are not anywhere close to being the same size. These are close to being the same size, but they're pretty clearly not. Band them down again. Yeah, so it was like transistors were just these fairly small compared to the vacuum tubes they replaced, individual components that replaced vacuum tubes. And so the design of things like the transistor radios, okay, the design of those was essentially the same as it was when they had tubes, except the transistors kind of replaced the tubes. That's oversimplistic, but it's kind of close to how it was done because, a transistor replaced a tube. Okay. So the thing here is you can see the pins on either side, maybe little pins on either side where the reaction control jets go in those. The ones on the top and the bottom are gone because they had to be in order to get this to work. But the other one still has them, at least in vestigial form. So I can use that as a guide to the location of where the jets go on the bottom and the top. So those will be cemented in and the gaps filled and sanded before this thing is primed. What is this? Every time I look at this from a different angle, there's something else that's wrong. There's right here on the bottom where it's obviously visible, there is a bit of plastic that apparently stuck to the mold. And so instead of having a nice smooth surface there is a bump. What will need to be done is that will need to, this entire section will need to be sanded so that it has a uniform texture. What I'm going to do next is the dark aluminium should be dry by now. I'll test it in my unscientific way of just touching it. Just, oh yeah, I guess it's dry. It didn't come off on my finger. Okay, well, we got rid of the flaw. Okay. So let's do a little more relaxing painting. Yep. We can paint the inside of this hatch now. You can even hold it while I paint it and set it down. I'm going to be using the dark aluminium for that, and I'll do this first. And then I'm going to, time to take these off. Good, they're not all gummed up. That's a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to paint the dark aluminium inside of this, and then I'm getting the duraluminum, and I'm going to be painting the probe on this antenna, the inside of this antenna, and the probe on this antenna, and then the rest of it will be painted a brighter aluminium color. So I'm going to be doing two color things here. The painting, I wonder, yeah, I don't have to get more of the dark aluminium. Paint in here is still good. I just had to mix it up so that the metallic bits were evenly distributed in the solvent. Why is this brush leaving bubbles? It's annoying. That one bubbles inside my hatch. Just have to deal with that after I get the color on here. This is the kind of thing, even though I'm keeping my fingers well away from the painted surface, okay, you can see that I've got a good 1/4 inch of clearance there, 1/8 of an inch anyway. It's the kind of thing where the paint is almost certain to jump up off of the surface onto my fingers. Like right there, there's a spot right there. Just as a reminder, I'm not going to be doing a full stream today. because of appointments. I am going to go until probably 12:30, a little more than an hour from now. Go until 12:30, and then so instead of taking a break at about 12, I'll just keep going until then. And then around 12:30, 12:37, some time number around then, I'll end for the day. But look at me, I'm getting painting done, doing painting, and relaxing painting with Dyson Dungeons. What I'm going to do is that after I get the bubbles out of this, because there just are for reasons, right? And after I paint the Dur aluminum, or as the bottle says, Dur aluminium, on the antenna bits. Okay, well, this hatch will look okay. It will contrast against the color of the Lunar Excursion module, which is a little darker and has a tiny bit of blue in it. Set that in here. It's a done piece. And then I need to clean this brush. Like I said, because these metallic paints don't clean up that well in the water, even though they're an acrylic. So I use some isopropyl alcohol, which is, gentle. It's rubbing alcohol. It's what's used apparently for massages. I don't know. I don't do massages, but apparently it's called rubbing alcohol because people rub it on people. Take their word for it. Get smaller brush. I'm not going to use the teeniest brush yet. I'm going to use that when I actually paint the final bits where I need to be very careful about the edges. But I don't need to be careful about the edges quite yet. After I'm done with this color, let's just set these in the box here so that they're in the box. When I'm done with this color, then I'm going to work on the parts that I cemented on to the lem here. These bits here, you can see some seams, see the seams? I'm going to work on those next while this paint is drying. I'm saving these two bits for later because seriously, just getting those usable, just those two parts, those tiny little bits will probably take like half a stream. You can see these bits of the antenna are being painted this color, which is a slightly darker color than the dish is going to be painted, but it is a lighter color than the support strut. Why am I using all these different colors? Well, because I have them, and because I think it looks a little bit better for some of these bits to just stand out. So it's not just like I just painted everything one color. It shows an effort. It's what moves this from a C grade, not like an ocean C, but like an ABCC, from a C grade antenna to a B grade antenna. And if I get all of the lines right, if I get them nice and sharp and clean and uniform, it might even be an A minus. Painting, some people like to paint down onto a flat surface to get the lines straight. Like down, they'd paint the dish first and then paint these and get the lines that way. I, for some reason, prefer to paint like horizontally and up to it. I just find it easier to do it that way. I can't say it comes out better. I don't know that it comes out any better or not. But, oh my, okay. I wanted to get it all around the surface so that, there weren't any white gaps, but I didn't intend to put that much paint on it. That's okay. The other color will cover it, but it was just sloppy. I got sloppy there. Inexcusably sloppy. Unnecessarily sloppy. So this part of the LEM, other than the challenge of getting all the parts to fit together and the seams to not show, and dealing with little bits that are different sizes when they're supposed to be attached to each other. Other than that, is not quite as intricate as the descent stage, which has all sorts of little struts on its landing gear, its landing legs, that all need to be kind of nicely prepped. The challenge on this one is the windows that I have been seriously working hard to avoid getting to. But this is getting to the point. It's starting to get to the point where I have to do that. I have to deal with the windows, or else it's either that or abandoning the lunar excursion module, because everything else that I'm doing to avoid dealing with the windows will be done. And so my efforts to avoid, they'll be finished. And so, eventually I'll be dealing with the windows on the LEM. There's two challenging bits, there's many, among the many challenges of the windows. Okay. Among the many challenges of the windows are that they're not molded. Okay. The clear windows in this model are, rather than being molded in clear plastic, there's just a sheet of plastic, kind of like the same plastic you get in a takeout container, a clear takeout carrier kind of thing. So I'm looking for like a nail here, because there aren't so many. It isn't so much that there's bubbles, but that there's again, this is the kind of thing that nobody's ever going to see once this thing is put together, but it's like there's buildup in the corners. It's not the paint, it's the plastic. So it is going to be what it is. It is just another example of there's just a little buildup in the corner there of the plastic. This is going to be facing down. The only way you'll see it is like take the LEM and rotate it and look hard at the corner. It's just so annoying. I am going to try to get rid of it. Sometimes I find that when I'm trying to fix something like this, like getting rid of a little blurb of plastic that shouldn't be there because it didn't pull off the mold cleanly, that I just make a mess somewhere else. And looks like I'm avoiding that. Okay, well, it's better now. Replace the paint. Ugh, that was an unnecessary blot. Jeez, seriously. The good thing I'm not painting anything real detailed today. I was thinking about working on the astronauts. These guys, okay. These are base coat painted a really nice white color. They're kind of shiny, maybe too shiny. Anyway, there's some detail on there that needs to be painted different color than white. And I was thinking about working on those today, but I decided not to, and that was a good decision. Because if I can't get this, if I can't paint the inside of a rectangular spot without messing things up, you can imagine what I would be doing there. It doesn't bode well for the rest of the antenna, but for, it's the kind of thing where I can go back and forth with different colors until I get the lines right if it's too difficult to do it the first time. I've got a lot of time left today. I have to fill the time with like doing things on the model. Well, one thing I'm almost tempted to do this is I want these brackets on these brackets. I want to install them. Okay. Before I prime it and paint it, because it's supposed to be like an integral part of the chip, not just something that looks like it's stuck on like it looks now. Okay. It looks like it's just sort of stuck on because that's what it is. It's just, there's big gaps. I'm going to cement these and let it set for like a half hour. Maybe at least that long. And then I'm going to fill in the gap with spackling so that I can sand it down and get it ready for priming. It's something I have to do. So this is a thing I can do now. And then while that cement is setting, having a great old time just sitting around, holding on so it doesn't break off, then I can work on sanding down these seams. So that's a thing to do. That's a thing I can do. And it's also while I'm waiting for that other color paint to dry. Put some brushes away. So I'm going to be using the teeny brush. I'm using this color. I don't need the files right now, so I'm going to put those in a different place here. And then I'm going to stick some parts on the model. I'm using this professional. I probably shouldn't be using this because it says professional. And I'm not a professional. So when I'm using that, I'm probably working way above my skill level. I don't know. It's a pretty big contact area here. And I'm going to take advantage of that. Because this is an uneven surface. It's probably too much cement. If it oozes out a little bit, that's okay, because it'll be partially filling the gap. Someone asked once why I don't use CA glue. This is why. Okay, if you use CA, it sometimes sets up really fast, and I'm not fast. In fact, I'm just, it's a lucky thing if I get the part in the right place, right? With CA, that would have been, if I'd missed, that would have grabbed already. I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Now, if I needed to, I could actually pull that off and clean off the cement and start over. So I'm going to hold this in place now for, I don't know, a minute. And during that minute, I could talk more about transistor radios. I suppose I could. How transistors were each one an individual component. And 3 little wires that, you needed to know which one was the source, which one was the gate, and which one was anyway, the third one, and then the third one. So those 3 parts, and each one, you had to know which wire was which, so that you could attach it to the appropriate places. Like the gate would go to the signal that controlled the gate, and the source would go to where the electrons came from, and the other one would go to where they go out. And then, there was the number of transistors in your radio competition, just like the number of jewels in your watch. I think maybe I'm not sure. I think things were supposed to be honest back then, but maybe they weren't. Maybe each transistor radio really just had 7 transistors. And sometimes on the case, they said 7 transistors. And maybe sometimes on the case, they just said 11 transistors. It didn't say there are 11 transistors that are working components of this radio. I mean, that's not what the case said. It just said 11 transistors. That's the thing you can say, right? I mean, for all I know, all of that was just a ruse to get you to pay a little bit more for a radio that's had a case that had a bigger number on. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying, how would we know? Did we take it up? Some people did. They would take it out, they would open it up and look inside and try to identify the transistors. And there were other components in there. Just these were not integrated circuits, right? It wasn't like a little chip that had prongs coming off of it. Each component was soldered into this little breadboard kind of thing, which was a piece of fiberboard, plasticized fiberboard that had little holes in it all over the place. And those little holes were places where you could put wires and then solder them in from the other side and connect them that way. It was a way of keeping the components, from flopping around, a place to which you could attach them. Okay, well, that seems to be gripping. So let's do the other one. So yeah, you could take it apart, and you could identify many of the components. One, you could identify the resistors. That's what they did. They resisted electricity going through. And you could identify the capacitors. Sometimes it was hard to tell them apart, especially like the resistors were always these little cylinders that had banded color bands on them. Some of them were pretty tiny, like rice grains. Some of them were a little larger, but they were all just cylinders. And they had these stripes on them. And the color and the position of the stripes told you how much it was resisting. Okay. Basically the capacity of the resistor. Capacitors, if I remember correctly, capacitors could look a lot like transistors. And it's kind of hard to tell. Well, these are going to be in place now. You can see they're kind of symmetric, right? On either side of the LEM. And then the reaction control jets go on the top and the bottom, and on the front and the back. You can see the pins on this one. And you can make a judgment as to where the pin would have been on these. So there's that. Because of the way these are designed, they don't really rotate, which is good. So it's a matter of just holding them in place until it isn't going to droop anymore. Some cement that oozed out here. I'm going to let that be, because that just kind of fills the gap in. And this should set up in about a half an hour, so that near the end of the stream I can get the toothpick out and the spackling compound, which I am using as the filler of choice on this model. And I'm going to just spread a little bit of it around all of these gaps, especially the ones in the front. And then that will be sanded down on Wednesday. But then these, it's just good to have parts attached, because then I can make more progress on the model. That's not really going anywhere. Bits so that the gap on the top and the bottom are fairly even. Okay, so there's that. Oh, let me cap this up. I should have done that earlier. There we go. And I don't need this pin anymore. I need the sanding. The first integrated circuits were really exciting, because then you didn't have individual transistors anymore. You might have like a dozen on in one circuit. That's when we started having chips. I'm not using a file on this. I'm just using sandpaper and a sanding block. Yeah, there's a gap there. Okay, so the parts came together okay, but there's a gap because the parts didn't fit very well. And here it extended a little too far. And I'm going to put some filler in there all the way around it. And then again, like I said, the texture of the spackling compound is more matte than semi-gloss. And so it kind of shows. It's not going to show very much. These gaps are really tiny. And I hope that that it stays in there. I'm actually going to use the sandpaper on the entire surface. Probably wait until after the. I'm actually going to wait until after the fill is in. And set. Because that'll have to be sanded again. You have to sand it again when the filler, dries. And that will be a time when it makes sense to sand the whole thing. And the surfaces, the whole surface will be sanded and polished so that it's uniform across. Otherwise, there'll just be like these spots that show with a different reflectivity, and I'm trying to avoid that. It was just a little lip of that kind of came over the edge instead of forming a nice smooth surface there. Yeah, the sanding part is really kind of, I'm sorry, it's kind of, it's not painting, it's just sanding, but it's necessary because even though I'm not getting the parts like perfect, because I don't have the right, I haven't found the right material to do it yet. They look a lot better when the seams are as invisible as possible. Otherwise, it just looks like it would have looked if I built this when I was 11 or 12, which would have been to just glue the parts together and don't worry about the seams. Who cares? You can't really, just didn't. Wanted to get the model done. So I would, put the model together and not worry about the seams. And then probably in this case, I would have just brush painted it with some sort of enamel paint. And it, if you stood back at a really good distance, it would have looked okay. In this case, one can get closer. Let's say, the model I would have built when I was like 11 or 12, you wouldn't want to get any closer than maybe, I don't know, 3 feet. No, with this model, I think you can get up to within like 18 inches of it, as long as the lighting isn't too bright, and it would still look okay. Maybe that's how I should classify the construction quality of my models, is the distance under indirect lighting. Okay, how close can you get before it looks? How close can you get before it starts looking scabby? Where you can tell that it's not a professionally done A quality model. I'm aiming for 18 inches on this. I think I succeeded for the most part on the submarine. I think I succeeded, and maybe there are components of it where I would say it's even a 12-inch model, like the galley, okay, and some of the control room. So that came out kind of okay. Well, I'm glad this is all at the back of it. Right. That's part of the model. It's there just to get in the way of being able to effectively sand this particular component. I'm sure that that's why it's there. It was put there intentionally, just to get in the way of being able to effectively sand away the seam. So not all of these seams have any little gaps in them. Okay, this one has more than the other one, but I'm going to run a little tiny little bead of spackle all along the seams. And if if there's no indentation, if there's no gap to fill, then it'll just sand off later. If there's a gap to fill, it will fill it. Like here, I'm not feeling much of a gap, but I can't be sure. So that is what I'm going to do. Hmm. Yeah, the two sides were not symmetric, again, because mainly because the parts weren't, they just didn't fit. But this is, they are not at the same height. This side was okay, but this side is not. Using the reflectivity. This thing is this thing. Most of the Apollo model is painted white. Okay, you can see the outside of it is white. And when I showed the service module earlier, you can see I painted a kind of a pearlescent. Well, I'm not sure that that's necessarily authentic, but it gives it a nice sheen. It looks good. So I'm using it on the exterior components of the LEM. And you can see from the model, it's painted darker color. It's painted a dark metallic gray. Even though I grew up at the time, I don't remember noticing the color of the LEM, but I'm assuming that the model maker, giving the vague painting directions, red, black, silver, okay, because that, well, and that kind of fit the time. There aren't that many different colors to work from. Most of the colors, the different, airplane colors and things were kind of like real basic colors. Although people who made model cars started demanding more colors, and you started getting metal flake and things like that, which were pretty cool. Okay, there's a little bit of a ridge there that isn't on this side, but that's okay. I'm just gonna it's just the way it is. I'm not gonna try to clean that up. That would be really difficult. Okay, so I'm going to now, let's see. Yeah, get out the spackle here. I'm going to fill in, especially the gap here where the tab went into the slot. Okay, just down in there. And then a little bit up on the edges and the corners. I'm just going to run it along the top and the back here, just to make sure that there isn't a gap. Up in the front here, what I'm kind of tempted to do, but I won't, is because this is set back a little bit, like a 64th of an inch all along, and this one isn't. I am almost tempted to file this down a little bit. Oh, that would be a touchy thing to do just to make it symmetric, but no. The better part, sometimes I tell myself, don't do it. I've done that before, where I tried to do a little bit of detail that wasn't really necessary, but would have been kind of nice. Okay, if you know what I mean, it would have been nice to be able to pull it off. And it failed. It was a disaster. And I needed to like clean off a whole pile of paint. Needed to clean off paint and repaint a part. It was, yeah, and that's what this is. This is one of those things where it's just really need to just leave it alone, even though it would look better. The odds of successfully pulling it off, for me, not for a master modeler who would go, well, of course that's what you would do. You make it look absolutely perfectly symmetric. Would probably just, take a little bit of sandpaper or a file and would take maybe, I don't know, 30 seconds to make it look perfect. But that's not me. No, that's not my skill level. If you want to see that done, there are probably other much better streams that you could catch. And they probably advertise themselves. It's like master modeler makes master model. A+ work every time. I think this stream, I don't know who's, yeah, I do this, and so I don't watch it again. But I think that the other members of Dyson Dungeons who, post this stream, I think they say old man trying to make a model and sort of maybe making a mess of it. It'll be fun to watch. Yeah, I know this looks really messy, and it is, but it's spackling compound. It sands really easily. If there's a gap there, it'll fill it. If there isn't, it'll sand off, because I need to resand this whole thing anyway, just to make sure that the surface consistency is somewhat uniform. Somewhat uniform before I paint it. But the big thing is to get the gap down at the bottom, and I look like I failed there. There's a little hole showing. This goes on pink and turns white. And I don't know. I've wondered about whether, it's just because of the materials they use, it just is pink, or whether they put some sort of dye in it, thinking that if it goes on pink, that's a good thing, because then you can see where it is. And then it turns white because you want it to be white before you start doing like painting. Gap down here. So I want to put too much in it. And say not too much. I want to put too much in it because then I can sand down to the surface. And if I don't put too much in it, then I'm not filling the gap. And if I don't fill the gap, then that misses the point of filling the gap by failing to fill the gap, right? Right. So too much in this case for me, since I'm not a master modeler and I'm not showing you how to do it, I'm showing you how I do it. It's the way it is. So I'll get sanded down later. When later being Wednesday. Try to say it the right way. It's really hard to say Wednesday the right way. It's hard. It's way easier to say Wednesday. WEND was, but that's not how it's spelled. So I have a little rant about that I repeat periodically on Wednesday. Okay, well, there's that. And I've got these gaps here. And since I've got this out and they're not falling off, I'm just going to stick it in the, go ahead and fill these in. Bigger gaps. This is just going to, it just looks really messy. It is. That's the way it is. I want to make sure it gets down into the cracks, and then I'll worry about sanding the surface down when it's time to sand the surface. And then sometimes, I don't get it sanded perfectly, but after the primer is put on, after it's primed, it's usually pretty obvious if there's something that needs to come off that hasn't come off yet. It'll just look all blobby. Done putting this pink stuff all over this. Okay, when I'm done doing that, then I will go back to painting the antennae because they need to be painted and the duraluminum is dry. I can finish those. Me making it. Yeah. It's definitely messy. But once it's sanded, it will look better than it did before I put this goo on it. Because those big gaps will not be quite as obvious. They won't be big gaps. They'll just be. It'll look like like I said before. I'm hoping it'll look just kind of like a welding seam, maybe. Removing some of the excess here. Anyway, there's pink stuff now on the gaps that were there because it wasn't perfectly done to begin with. Yeah, managed to get that done. Huh, how about that? Okay, the next, I think I'm going to do the hardest ones first. Okay. Because at this time of the stream, I really start losing. Well, no, that's what I usually do. What am I saying? Usually it happens like about 1:15, 1:30. That's only noon. So I can't use the excuses. Usually at this part of the stream, I start losing focus because I'm not at that part of the stream. I'm going to need these sticky tack things again so that I can put them in when I'm done. I need a thing on which will hold them. I need something that will hold them while it's drying. Can't forget about that. Here, this palette is getting near the end of its useful life. This is the lightest color of the ones I'm using today. Two drops out because, well, there's, yeah, anyway, there it is. Yeah. Not use the 2x magnifiers. I probably could for doing this, but then I would just be disappointed in the results. So we'll do this side first. This is the harder of them, more difficult. I said I find it easier to just paint up to the surface. Oh, this paint is really liquid. And there's a lot of solvent in this compared to making it difficult to get good coverage. I'm wondering, I might just need to let this set for a bit and evaporate a little bit because it's thrilled with what's happening here. Paint is, there's too much solvent in the paint. Is I guess what I'm saying. And so the pigment, the metallic bits are just kind of floating around. Considering doing was letting it evaporate a little bit so that it was less liquid. I mean, it's coming out okay, but it's just hard to work with, and it's not uniform in color. I'll keep going and see what happens. I'm just going to come around and do a second coat on it, I guess. Weird. I don't remember having this issue with it before. And it's not like stirring it would help it because it's maybe, I don't know. It's just really odd what's happening here. But yeah, I'm going to let this set a bit and come back to it. It's not covering very well. I've used this before, and I don't remember it being like this. It's like it's just misbehaving. Maybe it's because when I've used it before, it's been such tiny little bits that this amount of surface is actually more than before. But I'm going to have to come back and do a second coat on these to get a uniform coverage. There's always something, isn't there? There's always something that makes it take longer and be more difficult, annoying than one would think is reasonable. Getting the bottom of the cone here. Try to get the edges of it look kind of uniform. Well, it's just not it's not being good. Not bad, like I said. A second, maybe even a third coat will make it look okay, but I shouldn't have to do that. I'm getting some tweezers. I can't hold this and stick it in the sticky tack at the same time. Well, let me paint this one. I'm just going to go back and forth until they're done. I guess the lucky thing is, since this stuff is being so liquid, is that to get the edge down there along the bottom of all of these, it's like concave, and so the paint just sort of flows into where it needs to be. This just means it's going to take longer than I expected, because I'm going to have to do 2 coats instead of, maybe even 3 coats instead of 1. Yep. So that is a thing that sometimes happens, is things happen other than the way I want them to happen. Again, this isn't really this isn't a major problem. It's just an annoyance more than anything. The paint isn't behaving the way I was expecting it to. So what did I talk about today? Oh yeah, transistors. When transistors were a thing, each individual transistor was a thing that needed to be soldered and wired into place, one at a time, well before integrated circuits. I mean, there probably were integrated circuits, okay, but they were like experimental things that were used for government stuff and whatever. They did not show up in the transistor radios that we had in 7th and 8th grade. Okay, that was not there. I'm going to use a bigger brush on the back of this, I think. Guessing that 3 coats of this might be necessary. The uniform look that I want. It's nice and shiny. That's good. I like that. Yeah, well, it dries quickly enough, at least. Possible to coat it quick. I don't have to wait forever before putting another coat on. This brush just around. The paint is, yeah, some of the solvent is, anyway, yeah, I should use a bigger brush on this to get a more uniform look. Okay, let me do that. Yeah, time's going okay. By the time I finish this, like putting maybe a third coat on it or so, it'll be time for me to call it a half day. And then I'll do a recap. I'll start doing a recap as I finish painting here. Good. This was one of the very, very few times when I didn't lose this little plastic cover for the brush. There. Yeah, that was a better choice for this. Again, I'll be putting 2 coats on. But the bigger brush helps. And I think I can use it for the second coat of this too. Because the edge, I've already got the edge done. I just need to get this kind of a uniform look. Well, this might not be the best brush for this, but I'm just painting. I'm just painting the lip of it. So if I keep the brush horizontal, it should be okay. This is a different brush than the one I used on the hatch, and it doesn't seem to be leaving bubbles. I don't know what was with that other brush. Okay. Oh, yeah, I got to make sure I get the edges here. This dish has, it's not a real point, it's fine edge. It's a, excuse me. Unfortunately, these sneezes tend to come in bunches, so there might be a few more. What's the front of this coming? Yeah, another coat is not going to hurt. Let's say that. Yep. Snuffle, snuffle, sneeze, sneeze. So it's, you can actually kind of see the difference in the color. The duraluminum is just slight, maybe on camera, right? Is slightly darker. Can you see it? It's slightly darker than the dish. So that's just a little. That's my B plus detailing for this. Okay, that looks okay now. I need to do the tweezers thing again. Put this in the other one. So if on Wednesday when I come back it doesn't look good, I will paint it again. The extra coats, I think they're working pretty well here. So this isn't like a disaster or anything. It's just an annoyance. that I needed to do the extra painting. Okay, so the antennae I think are coming out okay. You can see that the struts that are holding it are definitely darker than the antennae, so you can see how those stand out. And under the right light, you can see that the probe part of the antenna or the inside of the dish there are darker than the dish. Okay, like that part is darker, and that's good. That's what I was hoping to achieve. I'm going to put these in, to do with them. They're just in the way, and they're going to get knocked over if I'm not careful. So, and I'm usually not. Like I said earlier, this is going to be just a half-day session. So let me start recapping. Okay. I'm going to do the recapping that I usually do at 1:45. Pretty much what I did today was I got the antennae painted. That's pretty good. So those are done. I've got these little mounts, these wing mounts here that are holding the reaction control jets. I cleaned those up sufficiently and attached them and put some spackle in. It's starting to turn white already. You can see that I will sand down later to fill in the gaps. And I did the sanding down and gap filling on these parts that I had attached last Monday. And there's like all sorts of spackle bubbling up on there, but that sands off really pretty easily. So the things that need to be done next are these two parts here, these little bits here, where the two halves are not the same size. I'm going to predict that probably like an hour and a half of Wednesday. And I'm not sure if it's going to be a full or half-day Wednesday yet. It depends on whether that appointment continues to be as scheduled or not. Is just going to be getting these to the right size. It's going to require a removal of a lot of plastic, and on things that are really hard to hold to begin with. So that'll be little bitty stuff doing a whole lot of stuff. I'm going to sand down the parts like this. Okay, I'm going to sand down the gaps and try to make those look nice, and then do some final fitting of the parts. Oh, dang. Yeah, there's some more gaps here. Sorry. I had totally forgotten about this part that I had put on much earlier. Yeah, is this, whatever. Take a few more minutes. Sanding down places where I had filled in gaps. And these are gaps. These parts were put in earlier, and I haven't really sanded them down yet. Not only are there gaps, but they don't fit. I don't know why I didn't do that. I just didn't. So that's going to take some more sanding. Unfortunately, Wednesday is going to be a whole lot of you're going to see a whole lot of filing and sanding again. is just how this model is. So there will be that, trying to make these seams as inconspicuous as possible before I prime it. What I may end up doing if I get really brave and there's time on Wednesday is I may cut out the windows for the LEM and test fit them. I'm not sure. I have to be careful about putting them on. I want them to adhere really well because they need to be, they're going to need to be taped, masked so that I can paint the rest of this. Oh yeah, I totally forgot about the gap in the back. Wow. Good thing I looked at this because otherwise it would be yet another 2 streams while I was waiting. Well, I remembered to fill these in and I was sanding them down. But yeah, there's a fair amount of sanding to be done on these little bits here. Or there's just discontinuities where there shouldn't be. So the windows, yeah, I have to cut them out of the plastic and I have to test some adhesives because I don't want them to cloud, but I also want them to adhere very strongly so that when I mask them, they'll stay in place while I manipulate this whole thing while it's cemented together and the seams are cleaned up, the front and the back half, okay, because that's a thing. It's going to be a thing of stuff that needs to be done. I'm going to fill these in here. It's a little hard to sand things down there because it's on the inside, but at least the gaps in the front. There's some pretty significant gaps in the front. I thought this part fit better than it did. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm kind of surprised at how poorly it is. But that's typical, of the parts not fitting. Gaps and needing sanding and all of that sort of thing. Anyway, yeah. So I'm going to be doing filing and sanding on Wednesday. And maybe if I'm really brave, like I said, I'll cut out the windows and maybe test if there's a little bit of scrap that I can work with, maybe test some adhesives. I've got this thing called the world's best canopy glue, which is designed to attach transparent parts to models. And I want to see if it adheres well enough. Okay, well, that's enough of messing around with that. If I need to do more, I can always put more on. So I got some antennae painted, and it came out pretty well. That was painting. Did painting with Dyson Dungeons. I got some parts cleaned up. I got some attached. I did some sanding. I did some filing. I talked about painting the astronauts now that they're all shiny white, looking all astronaut-y there. And I will be back on Wednesday. Oh yeah, that's what I need to remember to do. What I need to remember to do is I need to make copies of the window pattern because I don't want to cut up. I'm not going to cut up the instruction manual because I need like the other side of these things. And I can't just use it the way it is. I need to place these on the plastic in a very specific way. Anyway, we'll see what happens on Wednesday. See how far I get. But I want to thank everybody for joining in so far. Thank you for the new follow. I will invite everybody once again to watch our Dungeons and Dragons show. If you can't catch it with the live chat on Sundays at 2, Definitely catch it on YouTube. If you are just joining in, all of our previous episodes are on YouTube and as a podcast, so you can get to know our characters, catch up on some of the plot lines, that sort of thing. That will make if you watch our show, it will make it more enjoyable if you know that kind of stuff. Thanks for being a follower on Twitch. If you do this on a podcast, I think it's called a sponsor. That would be wonderful if you became one of those. And if you really like to support Dice and Dungeons, like if you would, help support this show, if you like this kind of thing, or more importantly, our Dungeons and Dragons show, if you'd like to support that, you can go to patreon.com/diceanddungeons, patreon.com/diceanddungeons, and become a patron. And depending on the level you join in at, you definitely will get access to our Dungeon Master's notes from prior sessions and our warm-up improvs that we do before each show. And those tend to be, they range from stupid to fun. If you can laugh at stupid, you can laugh at real funny. But we enjoy doing those, and that helps gets us ready to do a good performance for our show. And if at a certain tier, I understand you can even be named in the credits of the show, which is pretty amazing. So thanks again. I will be back on Wednesday starting at about 10, and we'll then go on either to 12:30 like I did today, depending on what else is happening. I won't know until then. Or I'll just take a break and continue until 2 and just keep plugging away at the components of the Lunar Excursion module. Thanks again, and see you then.